You know that frying pan that's sitting on your stove right now? Well, it turns out it has this incredibly dramatic history. Seriously, it's a story packed with accidental discoveries, some pretty big corporate secrets, and this constant tug of war between making things easy and making them safe. So we're going to peel back all those layers and see how we got from simple clay pots to the high-tech stuff we use today.
And believe it or not, our story doesn't start in some fancy, modern lab. It starts right here. This is the kitchen at Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home. And way back, over 200 years ago, he was already worried, really worried, about what his cookware was made of.
And this is what's so fascinating. Jefferson knew that his really nice copper pans, which you kind of needed for the fancy French food he loved, could actually be dangerous. See, if that thin tin lining wore off, the copper could literally leach poison right into the food. It just goes to show you, this whole concern over non-toxic cookware, it's not some new fad. It's a problem people have been trying to figure out for centuries.
Okay, so before we jump into all the chemical coatings and brand names, what were people actually using? Let's take a look at how humanity first tried to solve this problem of cooking safely.
You know, for most of history, the best solutions were, well, literally right under our feet. People used totally natural, non-toxic stuff like clay and stone. And then, by the 1800s, cast iron really became the king of the kitchen. It was super durable, held heat like nothing else, and was completely safe to cook with.
This timeline really helps put it all in perspective. You see us moving from ancient cast iron to Jefferson worrying about his copper pans, and then, bam, 1938. A total accident in a laboratory changes everything, and it leads directly to the non-stick revolution that took over in the 1950s.
And right here, this is where the whole conversation shifts. The number one priority isn't just safety anymore, it's convenience. Suddenly, an invention comes along that promises to get rid of the single most annoying part of cooking: food sticking to the pan.
So the chemical at the heart of all this is a real mouthful: polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE. A scientist named Roy Plunkett was actually trying to invent a new refrigerant, but instead, he winds up with this bizarre, waxy, super slippery substance. His employer, DuPont, saw the potential and slapped a trademark on it: Teflon.
And once engineers figured out how to bond this stuff to aluminum, it just exploded. I mean, it was marketed as a straight-up miracle. All of a sudden, cleanup was a breeze, cooking was faster. It was a genuine revolution that changed the daily experience in millions of kitchens.
But here's the big twist in the story. This miracle solution, this icon of modern convenience, was hiding a huge, dark secret. The chemicals used to make it were creating a completely new kind of danger that nobody was talking about.
See, to make Teflon, companies were using a whole class of chemicals called PFAS, and one in particular called PFOA. They have a nickname, forever chemicals, and it's for a pretty chilling reason: they never break down. Once they're out in the environment or inside your body, they're pretty much there to stay.
And here's the most important part of this whole story. DuPont, the company making Teflon, knew about this. This wasn't some unknown side effect they found out about later. No, they had their own internal research showing the health risks of PFOA for decades, and they hid it from the public. It was a massive cover-up that put profits way ahead of people's health.
Eventually, the truth did come out, and it led to a major reckoning. In 2015, the EPA hit DuPont with this number, a $16.5 million fine. And to put that in perspective, at the time, that was the largest administrative fine in the agency's history. It was a direct punishment for hiding the truth about PFOA for so long.
And this is why it was so serious. This is what was at stake. The health risks that have been linked to PFOA are incredibly severe. We are not talking about minor issues here. We are talking about higher risks of awful diseases like kidney and testicular cancer, birth defects, liver damage, and major problems with the body's hormones.
And the danger wasn't just from the factories. Even the modern PFOA-free pans that still use PTFE can be risky. If you overheat them, we're talking above about 500 degrees Fahrenheit, the coating itself can start to break down and release toxic fumes. These fumes can give people flu-like symptoms, and tragically, they're often deadly for pet birds.
So, with the original Teflon formula now vilified, it created this massive opportunity. As people started learning about forever chemicals, a brand new market just exploded for cookware that promised to be both non-stick and totally safe.
Now, the search for alternatives had actually started way back in the 80s, but it went into overdrive after the PFOA scandal. Suddenly, everyone wanted a safer option, and the most popular new kid on the block was the ceramic-coated pan. It promised the best of both worlds, a non-toxic surface that was also non-stick.
So how do they really compare? Well, this chart gives us a quick look. Modern PTFE is still amazing at being non-stick, but it scratches pretty easily and has that lower max temperature. On the other hand, so-called ceramic coatings can handle way higher heat, and they're free of both PFOA and PTFE. The trade-off? Their non-stick surface can wear out a lot faster.
Which really brings us to the most important question of all. With all this new technology and all this slick marketing, what are we actually cooking our food on every day?
So the first thing we have to do is question that word ceramic, right? When you hear that, you're probably picturing a clay pot, something solid and earthy, but is that actually what these pans are?
Well, the short answer is no. Experts have a different name for this stuff, quasi-ceramic. It's not a solid piece of baked clay. It's a super thin coating that's made using a chemical process, and it's just sprayed onto a regular metal pan, usually aluminum. And the exact recipe for that spray? Yeah, that's almost always a trade secret.
And that leads us to the next huge question. Companies love to slap the label non-toxic on everything, but what does that word even mean? Here's the catch. There is no legal, regulated definition for non-toxic when it comes to cookware. A company can pretty much just decide for itself what it means.
And this is where things get really murky. Because there's no real regulation, independent testing has raised some serious red flags. Some of these so-called non-toxic coatings might contain things like titanium dioxide nanoparticles, silicones, and even trace amounts of heavy metals like lead and mercury. The lack of transparency just makes it almost impossible for us as consumers to know for sure. So because of all this confusion, all the marketing claims, a lot of health and safety advocates are now saying maybe the most reliable choice is just to go back to the basics. Back to the materials we know are safe, not because of a label, but because they've been used for generations without any of these chemical coatings at all.
And that leaves us with this one final thought to chew on. We've gone from fearing poisonous copper to inventing a miracle chemical that turned out to be toxic, and now we're trying to navigate this world of quasi-ceramics with secret formulas. It really makes you ask yourself, in this endless search for convenience, what level of risk are we actually willing to accept? And is it possible that, after all this so-called progress, the safest pan was the simplest one we had all along?